Hey there, Spartans. Welcome back. It's Miss Slattery with another First Chapter Friday, and I know it's kind of been a little while, so I'm sorry about that, but I hope you guys had a really good winter break. End of first semester, we made it, and are ready to kind of start fresh second semester. The book I wanted to bring you today, I know a lot of you guys right before winter break were talking with Mrs. Brunetti about the Spartan reading program and all of those amazing books and opportunities to be part of discussions and get raffle tickets and have cool prizes and all of that. So I wanted to start incorporating some of the books that she had put on that list. Just I know she talked a bunch of them up. I want to talk some of them up because there's a good selection there. So the book that I'm going to share with you today is actually this one here, and it's called The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. And I know what I've been sharing is mostly more geared towards young adults. This book is not necessarily classified as a young adult text. It is an adult text, although it does deal with young adults. The protagonist is a young person attending an academy. So, just to give you kind of that note as we get started, it's still a it's still a fantastic book. It just is a fantastic book. One of my favorites. I actually listened to it first and then went to get the paperback so that I could have the experience of reading it hard copy as well. This author kind of he's a newer author, new-ish, I should say. He's been writing for a while, but he came out with a book called The Underground Railroad a couple of years ago, and that one was hugely popular. I have not read that one yet, but I know they're already like teaching it in schools. It's that good. And then this is the one. This is slightly shorter that I read this past summer. So I'm going to go ahead and read you the back first, and then we'll kind of talk about it a little bit and dive right in. Okay, guys. This one, as you can tell, it's a national bestseller. It's a Pulitzer Prize winner, which is a big one for literature. NPR calls it beautiful, wrenching. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Whitehead is one of the most gifted novelists in America today. And I would not disagree with that statement. So if we take a look on the back here, I'm about to read it to you. You can see a picture of the author up top. All right. And it says, when Elwood Curtis, a black boy growing up in 1960s Tallahassee, is unfairly sentenced to a juvenile reformatory called the Nickel Academy, he finds himself trapped in a grotesque chamber of horrors. Elwood's only salvation is his friendship with fellow delinquent, Turner, which deepens despite Turner's conviction that Elwood is hopelessly naive, that the world is crooked, and that the only way to survive is to scheme and avoid trouble. As life at the academy becomes ever more perilous, the tension between Elwood's ideals and Turner's skepticism leads to a decision with repercussions that will echo down the decades. Based on the real story of a reform school that operated for 111 years and warped the lives of thousands of children, The Nickel Boys is a devastating, driven narrative that showcases a great American novelist writing at the height of his powers. Um, so I love that little synopsis. I think it captures this beautifully. We've got main character Elwood, right, who was sent away to this reformatory school that's based on a real school that actually existed, and they're meant to be reforming these young people, right? But what in fact happens is that they're tortured and abused and neglected, and it's quite horrific. But again, based on a true story. I think the friendship between Elwood and Turner is like beautiful and funny, and it'll make you laugh, make you cry, that kind of thing. And again, there's also a lot of kind of underlying racial issues that are happening in this book. So, if I didn't already give you the trigger warning for this, it has some graphic violence, it has some racial language in it. Be forewarned that those things do exist in this text. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead, open it up, and you're actually getting the prologue today. It's about 6 pages long. This is what the prologue looks like on the page. Okay. I'll go ahead and get started. It said, even in death, the boys were trouble. The secret graveyard lay on the north side of the Nickel campus, in a patchy acre of wild grass between the old work barn and the school dump. The field had been a grazing pasture when the school operated a dairy, selling milk to local customers, one of the state of Florida's schemes to relieve the taxpayer burden of the boys' upkeep. The developers of the office park had earmarked the field for a lunch plaza with 4 water features and a concrete bandstand for the occasional event. The discovery of the bodies was an expensive complication for the real estate company awaiting the all clear from the environmental study, and for the state's attorney, which had recently closed an investigation into the abuse stories. Now they had to start a new inquiry, establish the identities of the deceased and the manner of death, and there was no telling when the whole damn place could be razed, cleared, and nearly erased from history, which everyone agreed was long overdue. All the boys knew about that rotten spot. It took a student from the University of South Florida to bring it to the rest of the world, decades after the first boy was tied up in a potato sack and dumped there. When asked how she spotted the graves, Jody said, "The dirt looked wrong." The sunken earth, the scrabbly weeds, Jody and the rest of the archaeology students from the university had been excavating the school's official cemetery for months. The state couldn't dispose of the property until the remains were properly resettled, and the archaeology students needed field credits. With stakes and wire, they divided the area into search grids, dug with hand shovels and heavy equipment. After sifting the soil, bones, and belt buckles and soda bottles, after sifting the soil, bones and belt buckles and soda bottles lay scattered on their trays in an inscrutable exhibit. The Nickel boys called the official cemetery Boot Hill from the Saturday matinees they had enjoyed before they were sent to the school and exiled from such pastimes. The name stuck generations later with the South Florida students who'd never seen a Western in their lives. Boot Hill was just over the big slope on the north campus. The white concrete X's that marked the graves caught the sunlight on bright afternoons. Names were carved into 2/3 of the crosses. The rest were blank. Identification was difficult, but competition between the young archaeologists made for constant progress. The school records, though incomplete and haphazard, narrowed down who Willie 1954 had been. The burned remains accounted for those who perished in the dormitory fire of 1921. DNA matches with surviving family members, the ones the university students were able to track down, reconnected the dead to the living world that proceeded without them. Of the 43 bodies, 7 remained unnamed. The students piled the white concrete crosses in a mound next to the excavation site. When they returned to work one morning, someone had smashed them into chunks and dust. Boot Hill released its boys one by one. Jody was excited when she hosed down some artifacts from one of the trenches and came across her first remains. Professor Carmine told her that the little flute of bone in her hand most likely belonged to a raccoon or other small animal. The secret graveyard redeemed her. Jody found it while wandering the grounds in search of a cell signal. Her professor backed up her hunch on account of the irregularities at the Boot Hill site, all those fractures and cracked skulls, the rib cages riddled with gunshot wounds. If the remains from the official cemetery were suspicious, what had befallen those in the unmarked burial ground? 2 days later, cadaver sniffing dogs and radar imaging confirmed matters. No white crosses, no names, just bones waiting for someone to find them. They called this a school, Professor Carmine said. You can hide a lot in an acre, in the dirt. One of the boys or one of their relatives tipped off the media. The students had a relationship with some of the boys at that point, after all the interviews. The boys reminded them of crotchety uncles and flinty characters from their old neighborhoods, men who might soften once you got to know them, but never lost that hard center. The archaeology students told the boys about the second burial site, told the family members of the dead kids they'd dug up, and then a local Tallahassee station dispatched a reporter. Plenty of boys had talked of the secret graveyard before, but as it had ever been with Nickel, no one believed them until someone else said it. The national press picked up the story and people got their first real look at the reform school. Nickel had been closed for 3 years, which explained the savagery of the grounds and the standard teenage vandalism. Even the most innocent scene, a mess hall or the football field, came out sinister, no photographic trickery necessary. The footage was unsettling. Shadows crept and trembled at the corners, and each stain or mark looked like dried blood. As if every image caught by the video rig emerged with its dark nature exposed, the Nickel you could see going in, and then the Nickel you couldn't see coming out. If that happened to the harmless places, what do you think the haunted places looked like? Nickel boys were cheaper than a dime a dance, and you got more for your money, or so they used to say. In recent years, some of the former students organized support groups, reuniting over the internet and meeting in diners and McDonald's. Around someone's kitchen table after an hour's drive. Together, they performed their own phantom archaeology, digging through decades and restoring to humanize the shards and artifacts of those days. Each man with his own pieces. He used to say, "I'll pay you a visit later." The wobbly stairs to the schoolhouse basement, the blood squished between my toes and my tennis shoes. Reassembling those fragments into confirmation of a shared darkness. If it's true for you, it's true for someone else, and you're no longer alone. Big John Hardy, a retired carpet salesman from Omaha, maintained a website for the Nichols boys with the latest news. He kept the others apprised on the petition for another investigation and how the statement of apology from the government was coming along. A blinking digital widget kept track of the fundraising for the proposed memorial. Email Big John the story of your Nickel days, and he'd post it with your picture. Sharing a link with your family was a way of saying, "This is where I was made," an explanation and an apology. The annual reunion, now in its 5th year, was strange but necessary. The boys were old men now, with wives and ex-wives and children they did or didn't talk to, with wary grandchildren who were brought around sometimes and those with whom they were prevented from seeing. They had managed to scrape up a life after leaving Nickel, or had never fit in at all with normal people. The last smokers of cigarette brands you never see, late to the self-help regimens, always on the verge of disappearing, dead in prison or decomposing in rooms they rented by the week, frozen to death in the woods after drinking turpentine. The men met in the conference room of the Eleanor Garden Inn to catch up before caravanning out to Nickel for the solemn tour. Some years you felt strong enough to head down that concrete walkway, knowing that it led to one of your bad places. And then some years you didn't. Avoid a building or stare it in the face, depending on your reserves that morning. Big John posted a report after each reunion for those who couldn't make it. In New York City, there lived a Nickel boy who went by the name of Elwood Curtis. He'd do a web search on the old reform school now and then, see if there were any developments, but he stayed away from the reunions and didn't add his name to the lists for many reasons. What was the point? Grown men? What? You take turns handing each other Kleenex? One of the others posted a story about the night he parked outside Spencer's house, watching the windows for hours, the silhouette figures inside, until he talked himself out of revenge. He'd made his own leather strap to use on the superintendent, but Elwood didn't get it. Go all that way, you might as well follow through. When they found the secret graveyard, he knew he'd have to return. The clutch of cedars over the TV reporter's shoulder brought back the heat on his skin, the screech of the dry flies. It wasn't far off at all. Never would be. All right, so again, that is just the prologue to Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys. And you can already tell from that prologue, like our main character, our protagonist, Elwood, is clearly kind of haunted by the things that happened to him at Nickel Academy, as one, as one would be. But he's starting to realize that even though he scoffed at these other men who would go to their reunions for it, he might actually have to go back. There's something calling him back now that they found the secret graveyard. So again, this is a good one, quite dark, based on a real story. A lot of issues of just, idealism versus, realism, and how you look at the world and how you look at the way you fit into society. Great main character and just wonderful, wonderful prose. So take a look, guys. It's on the Spartan Reading Program list, and I hope you enjoy it. Happy Friday.